This is the video lecture for Jewish education. And we're going to start with a little bit of history. Jewish education in the 19th century and earlier was essentially Cheder education. Cheder is a Jewish elementary school. And we have a couple pictures of what they might have looked like or did look like in the 19th century and 18th century. Here's one picture. Here's another picture. You can see boys looking over books. This is one that's a little bit more recent from the 1940s. And this was probably the only education that Jewish kids got. It was holdover from Eastern Europe. The teachers were untrained, and there really wasn't a lot of structure or professionalism about it until this person came along right there. That is Samson Benderly. Benderly tried to clean up Jewish education. He was the first director of New York's Bureau of Jewish Education, and he is pictured here at the 1907 Zionist Convention in Tannersville, New York. And there's actually a couple other really prominent people here. This is Judah Magnus right here, and this guy with the long white beard is Solomon Schechter. And in fact, there are what are called Schechter Jewish day schools throughout the United States and the world named after him because of his work in Jewish education also. So Samson Benderly grew up in a Hasidic family, a very traditional Jewish family in northern Israel. He arrived in Baltimore in 1898 because he wanted to become a doctor, and then he left medicine to become an educator, and he felt that what was known then as the natural method of Hebrew education was the way to learn Hebrew, and he felt that simply learning Hebrew was the most important thing in terms of Jewish education. And his idea about this natural method of education actually is still practiced today. It's what's called an Ulpan, U-L-P-A-N is the way you would spell it in English, and it's basically language immersion, where you have intensive study only in that particular language, not like you are sitting in an English class learning about Hebrew or learning to speak Hebrew, but you speak it as if you're living with Hebrew. He opened the very first Hebrew-speaking summer camp near New York City, and he cleaned up filthy conditions in these schools. He instituted teacher training and accreditation. And so he's really seen as the person who got Jewish education on the right track. Now, he was dealing with what are called day schools in the Jewish world. A day school is essentially a parochial school during the day, and that's where the kids would go for their only school. There's a couple ways that works. Some Jewish schools today will have the first half of the day being Jewish education and the second half being secular education. Some schools will have what's called an integrated curriculum, where secular and Jewish are kind of plugged in with each other throughout the entire day. And when Benderly realized that day school was not going to be an appealing option for lots and lots of families, he instituted something called supplemental religious education, or called Sunday school sometimes, or religious school. And this is where kids would go 2 afternoons and a Sunday to the synagogue, and they would engage in Jewish studies at that time. And this is, in the last few decades, it's become less and less time as kids get more and more programmed. Interesting that in New York City, for example, religious school of this model does not meet on the weekends because so many families, Jewish families in New York City, get out of town on the weekends. Nobody would be there. And so then we ask, why do parents send their kids to these kinds of supplementary schools? And there are probably lots of reasons that you could think up yourself, transmitting Jewish values, lots of things like that. My wife actually did her master's thesis in education about why parents send their kids to Jewish schools, to religious education, and what she learned is that the parents that she interviewed simply said, well, I went, so I'm going to send my kids. And we have a couple videos that actually are used in some religious school settings. Let's get out of these, and we arrive. Oh, Ketantan, first of all. You can stop and take a look at this article if you want. Type in the URL to your own browser. Ketantan, in the middle of the early part and middle of the 20th century, was a very popular story in Jewish educational circles and Jewish religious schools, and it was about this little Tom Thumb in the Jewish world, and a lot of the themes had to do with assimilation, lots of things that we've learned about in our class. And then in the 1970s, we started to get Sesame Street getting in on it. And so I encourage you to please stop your video lecture and type in this URL and watch this short video of Grover learning Hebrew. Welcome back. And then after you watch Grover learning Hebrew, you can take a look at this one, which is also very interesting about the story of modern Hebrew, just a 2.5-minute video. So take a look at that. And welcome back. And now you can take a look at this one. Now before you look at this, let's introduce this a little bit. This one is in Hebrew, and it's created for the Hebrew elementary school, or Israeli elementary school kids, I should say. And it's about Eliezer ben Yehuda. Now it's only 2.5 minutes long. You're not going to understand anything in this video. But what you will understand is you'll see what's happening here. Now the thing to remember is that modern Hebrew education, or education in speaking modern Hebrew, is very recent. Hebrew as a language was a dead language until about 130 years ago. No one spoke Hebrew. In fact, when Jesus walked on the earth, no one spoke Hebrew. And for the last 2,000 years, Hebrew has been a language only of prayer and maybe of study for some people. And then this guy, Eliezer ben Yehuda, in the latter part of the 19th century, decided that he was going to revitalize Hebrew. Now, the problem with revitalizing Hebrew as a spoken language is that the only vocabulary that existed in Hebrew was that had been written down, basically in the Bible and some other Jewish legal and interpretive texts. Nobody had spoken this. And so you'll see in this little video, it's very cute, a kid comes up to him riding a bicycle and says, "How do you say bicycle in Hebrew?" And of course, there is no Hebrew word for bicycle, and so Ben Yehuda makes up a word. And he does it, and you'll see with the bicycle, he observes that there are 2 wheels, and so he makes up a word like that. He's sitting down at a restaurant, and the waiter says, you know, this is a restaurant, and he says, no, this is the word for it. Somebody hands him an ice cream cone and calls it by the French word for ice cream, gelato. Or is that Italian? That's Italian. And he says, no, not gelato, glida, which is the Hebrew word for ice cream. So that's a cute video. You can now pause and you can watch that video. Okay, welcome back. So another aspect of Jewish education in the United States that speaks a lot to assimilation and immigration is Jewish camping. Now, Jewish camping actually started in the middle of the 19th century, in the latter part of the 19th century, when we have this tremendous Eastern European Jewish immigration to the United States and horrible living conditions on the Lower East Side of New York. Now, the Eastern European Jews came to the United States between about 1880 and 1924, and they were preceded by German Jews who came in the middle of the 19th century. Now, the German Jews were very wealthy, and they became assimilated, and they saw all of these Eastern European Jews coming into New York, and the rich German wealthy Jews living on the Upper East Side of New York thought to themselves and discussed this and said it's not right that these Jewish kids are hanging out in New York City in horrible living conditions during the summer. And so they started creating Jewish summer camps for these poor Jewish kids to attend. Now, of course, the wealthy German Jewish families did not send their kids to those camps. This was more of a charity project. But these camps opened up north of New York in the Catskills, and one of them was called Camp Lehman, which was established in 1893 by the Jewish Working Girls Vacation Society of New York. And the Y movement, as in YMCA, but not Christian, and Jewish community centers started taking over, and now Jewish camping is an integral part of Jewish community center programming. And in 2004, at least, for one report that I wrote, the JCC, Jewish Community Center organization nationally, reported that there were 35 live-away camps or sleep-away camps and 200 Jewish day camps in the United States. And in the 1920s and 30s, there was this realization that summer camping might play a significant role in Jewish education. And so this one guy, A.P., he went by his initials, A.P. Schoolman, was the director of the Central Jewish Institute, which was a Jewish school on the Upper East Side of New York, and he founds Camp Sedgwin. So the second word, its first word is camp, of course. Second word is C-E-J-W-I-N. So you ask, wow, that sounds like a Native American name, which is exactly what it's supposed to sound like, because Native American themes in terms of summer camps were very, very popular in the early and middle part of the 20th century. But Sedgwin actually is an acronym that stands for Central Jewish Institute. They just took a few of the letters from the first few letters of each of those words. Central Jewish Institute becomes Camp Sedgwin, C-E-J-W-I-N. The Reform movement in Judaism gets into this in a big way, and there are now systems of Reform movement camps and other Jewish movement camps around the United States. Here in Houston, our closest one is near Waco, Green Family Camp it's called. So why don't we pause for a minute, and you can now take a look at comedian Amir Blumenfeld's reminiscing of summer camp. Okay, welcome back. And if you ever have seen the movie Wet Hot American Summer, it's a 2001 comedy, and it's actually based on the writers and directors' experiences at Jewish summer camp. I think it's on Netflix that a reunion series came up just a few years ago. Now, if we get to another aspect in Jewish education, it would be the day school movement. Day schools are, as I had said, parochial schools, and here in Houston we actually have quite a few of them. We have Jewish high school, a few Jewish high schools, lots of Jewish elementary schools. Some of them are integrated curricula. Some of them are single-gender education, the more traditional ones are. And then we get to Jewish at college. Now, when you get to college, one of the things that we talk about are quota systems. And in the early part of the 20th century, there were quotas on the number of Jewish students that could be admitted to college. And you certainly have a reading about that for this part of the course. And while quotas on Jewish students did not exist at the University of Houston, because the University of Houston was founded relatively recently, at Rice University there were quotas on Jewish students. You could not, Rice University would not admit you to their engineering programs if you were Jewish, because they felt correctly that you wouldn't be able to get a job. Petroleum companies and other engineering firms throughout Texas would simply not hire Jews. And so Rice, at that time Rice Institute, in the engineering school, they didn't want to admit anyone. And I actually spoke with someone who was admitted to Rice Institute in 1942, and he was very excited, and then Rice sent him another packet of forms for him to fill out, and in that packet of forms, it came out that he was Jewish. And the university sent him a second letter rescinding their admission for him. He was living up in Fort Worth with his family, and his family knew a few people down in Houston who knew people on Rice Institute's board of directors, who made a few phone calls, and then this individual got a third letter readmitting him to the university. In terms of Jewish education, one of the things that you have is the, not really explosion, but the increasing number of Jewish studies programs at universities around the country. University of Houston a few years ago instituted a Jewish studies program with a minor in Jewish studies, as some of you might know. And so that's the conclusion of this video lecture for Jewish education.